Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Home Builders and Remodelers Association of Connecticut Virtual Home Building Industry Day at the Capitol, presented by Kalkany Real Estate. My name is Jim Paris, and I'm the CEO of the Home Builders and Remodelers Association of Connecticut. Our association represents roughly 800 business companies statewide in the field of residential construction and those companies that facilitate our industry. Our mission is to use our effective advocacy and new knowledge to help improve and grow our industry. I'd like to start this morning by thanking our sponsors. Special thanks, of course, to our presenting sponsor, Kalkany Real Estate. Thank you, Antonio and Jill Grossman, for all you do for the HBRA. And a hearty thanks to our supporting sponsors as well. Sunwood Development Corporation, thank you, Bob Wiedemann. EG Home, thank you, Matt Gilchrist. Nelson Construction, thank you, Chris Nelson. T&M Homes, thank you, Greg Ugaldi and Steve Temkin. Santini Homes, thank you, Eric Santini and the Santini family. Advanced Group, thank you, David Preka. Simcroft Echo Farms, thank you, Mike Gerard. And the Lyco Group, thank you, Brian Listro. Tyvek by Parksite, thank you, Justin Farnsworth. By Carrier, thank you to Johnny Carrier and the Carrier family. Lawrence Fiano Builder, thank you, Mr. Larry Fiano, the Dean of our association. And Sunlight Construction, thank you, Bill Ferrigno. And last but not least, thank you, Verna Builders. Appreciate it, Liz. Thank you all. Important events like these would not be possible without your support. So we have a jam-packed hour and a half lined up for you, so let's get the program going. DECD Commissioner David Lehman was pulled away by the governor at the last minute and will be unable to join us, but he was gracious enough to send along Deputy Commissioner Alexandra Daum. As Deputy Commissioner and Chief Investment Officer, Commissioner Daum helps drive public investment in local economic development projects and initiatives across Connecticut, including greenfield and brownfield commercial real estate transactions, public-private partnerships, urban revitalization efforts, and opportunity zones. Commissioner Daum speaks our language as she has a background in real estate development as a senior development manager and as a project manager for a number of large-scale developments. Thank you, Commissioner Daum, for joining us. And without further ado, you have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. And yes, Commissioner Lehman is with the governor, and he said he may be popping in later, so we may get a surprise cameo from him. But thank you for having me, and I do love to address groups like this because it is, as you said, I speak the language more in my DNA. I have a multifamily development background, so close enough. I don't know how many multifamily folks we have on the phone are mostly single family, but close enough. So in any case, I'll jump right in, and the mandate today is to kind of provide an overview of Jim said the 10,000 foot level. So that's where we're going to focus today, is the 10,000 foot level for the Connecticut economy, focusing on the last year. And on all these presentations, we have to acknowledge what's happened over the last year, but we also really want to focus on recover and restore, as I have listed here, and what we're going to do to move forward from the pandemic, and try not to dwell on it the whole time. So there we go. So just a little bit of the facts here, and I gather Dr. Dietz, the next presenter, is going to go into a lot more of the facts on the housing market. But just at the 10,000 foot level here, we have not recovered our GDP levels to where we were in Q4 of 2019. So obviously not great news on that front. But good news is, and I like this slide a lot, we are not behind the curve. We are not behind our competitors. I shouldn't say that, our sister states nearby, and we're right in line with the U.S. as a whole. So the Connecticut is keeping pace with our neighbors, and we are getting back there. So it's good news and bad news, but we're on pace with everybody else to get back to where we were pre-pandemic. And I think, hopefully some of you are familiar with these projects already. I want to outline some of the specific, really cash programs, cash investments that the state has made in businesses basically the last year. So I won't go into a lot of detail, but we have put a lot of money to work trying to keep businesses strong as possible throughout. So we've done the bridge loan and the HEDCO loan lines of credit, which were loans that were largely forgivable. Small business grants, for grants, obviously. Recovery grants were to our hardest hit sectors, hospitality, retail, etc. Arts and museum grant, somewhat self-explanatory. And then, of course, the big elephant on this slide is the federal funding, which Connecticut has done exceptionally well in PPP and EIDL funding, with $8.8 billion coming to the state, and that's helped keep businesses afloat during last year. So, we're keeping pace with everybody. We're doing a good job on the recovery, and want to highlight some of the potential reasons why that is, including this direct funding. In addition to direct funding, a lot of policy strategic decisions were made at the state level that we think have been instrumental in keeping the economy as strong as possible over the last year. So probably very near and dear to the hearts of folks on this call is the fact that we deemed more industries to be essential during the pandemic than our neighboring states, and the most obvious one is construction. So there was a time for a couple months in the spring of 2020, it says here, where Massachusetts and New York both had construction sites closed down. And that was a really important strategic decision that the governor and Commissioner Lehman and all of DCD felt that keeping construction and in manufacturing also, importantly, keeping those businesses open was going to be key to maintaining the momentum during the spring, during the worst months of the pandemic. And I think you guys can all appreciate just the cost of mobilizing, shutting down a site, remobilizing, especially in the spring when a lot of starts are happening. It would have been really debilitating. And so we're pleased with that decision. We don't believe it caused public health spikes, which was part of the reason that our sister states were making the opposite decision. But we do feel like that was the right call for keeping the economy going and also minimizing public health risk. So that's a big one. We've also tried to be really consistent on reopening protocols with very few rollbacks of kind of making progress forward and then coming back. Regulatory relief. Hopefully some of you have been able to take advantage. Licensing has deadlines and processes have been loosened a little bit over the pandemic to just kind of help business continue while we have all these strange limitations in place on being in person and renewing licenses in that way. Restaurant reopening, probably not as professionally relevant to everyone, but personally, we're all happy that the industry has been able to be open. Indoor dining has been open since it opened in May, as opposed to, again, a lot of our sister states did a rollback with indoor dining. And then lastly, the tourism campaign that we focused on was really tailored and really successful around getting folks to come here for pandemic travel, which maybe sounds like an oxymoron, but people driving into the region and even from intrastate, people from Connecticut spending time and money in the region. And so that's a little summary between the last two slides, cash and policies. That's what we've been, a very high level summary of some of the approaches to trying to keep the economy going. And we're seeing that it is working. And so the next two slides are going to go through some of the good signs, early signs of recovery. And both slides really focus on two buckets, hopefully particularly relevant to this group, which is consumer preferences, resident preferences of where they want to live, and then as a result, how that's helping our economy to stay relatively stable in this time. So you'll all be much more familiar with these stats even than I am, and of course our next speaker will get into it, but we do have a very strong housing market right now in Connecticut, and that's fueled by demand. There's 16,000 net new requested address changes into Connecticut in 2020, according to the USPS. So that's 16,000 households. And they're mostly coming from our immediate neighbors, which is great. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if you don't have to commute to New York and Boston anymore, it'll now be a lot more attractive to live in Connecticut and in our nice open spaces and not in smaller cities as well. And through July, this increased demand, when demand increases, we're seeing obviously price increases. So through July, the median home sale price was up by 8% compared to the same period in 19. And then if you look at the more premium market, houses that are 400,000 and above, huge increase there, 58% increase. So how has this affected the economy? Housing market is a subset. How has this affected the economy as a whole? The Connecticut economy is in a good spot in terms of stability and outlook. And one of the things we're really proud of is the second bullet point here, that the credit agencies have reaffirmed Connecticut's stable outlook, and that's key to investors. Investor confidence remains strong, and part of my job, as Jim outlined in my bio, part of my job is to talk to developers who are coming in to try to build physical infrastructure or real estate throughout the state. And I can tell you the demand has not plummeted by any stretch. There's lots of demand for open land, brownfields, greenfields. We're running a brownfields program right now, which helps to revitalize brownfields, environmentally impacted abandoned sites. And there was a record number of applicants that were submitted last week, just with the deadline. So there is strong confidence and interest in the state from investors. So just a little bit more about, like I said, consumer preferences and the economy as a whole. On the left here, we're seeing those 16,000 change of addresses are largely driven. I wish I could ask every single one why they're coming in, but largely we think they're coming in because we all know the workforce has shifted to primarily remote, and we don't think that's temporary. We do think there's going to be some of that sticks around. We don't have a crystal ball as to how much, but I do think a hybrid of folks being required to commute less is here to stay. And Connecticut is so well positioned to take advantage of that, since the commutability to major cities is not really something people necessarily want to do 5 days. Major cities outside the state, I should say, not necessarily something people want to do 5 days a week, but 1 to 2 days is perfectly feasible. And so I think we're going to hopefully continue to benefit from those changing consumer preferences and changing work styles. And then lastly, just a little bit more on the stability of the budget as a result of all this in-migration and lots of other good financial stewardship. We do have the $3 billion rainy day fund, which is really best in class if you look across the country. And we had a really, really good result for fiscal year 21. There was a projected deficit, and we ended up, and hopefully you've all seen the news, ended up with an operating surplus for fiscal year 21. So we're feeling strong, and those are two factors that have contributed to the rating agencies, which I mentioned on the slide before. So I think this is my last slide. Hopefully I'm not bombarding you with information, but we just wanted to highlight a couple of DECD's priorities over the next year. These are initial priorities, so maybe the first half of the year, and maybe there'll be a whole nother set the second half. But on legislative action, we're very engaged with the legislature right now. A lot of our key initiatives involve trying to bring jobs to the state. That's one of DECD's main mandates. So trying to bring jobs to the state through really smart incentives that make sure that the taxpayers are only really paying the incentives when the jobs materialize. And that's a huge pillar of Commissioner Lehman's approach to tax incentives. And Business One Stop is sort of our buzzword for just making it easier to digitally do business with the state. And so all the things that you need, I think Jimmy said 800 business owners in your association. A lot of them probably are small business owners. I've been a small business owner in the past. I totally sympathize. It is exhausting to try to sometimes set up just sort of basic foundational documents and basic foundational interactions with the government. So we are really making an effort with business.ct.gov. It's a new platform where it centralizes all those digital services. Transfer Act is the most real estate relevant on this page, but it largely refers to sort of brownfields and larger sites. And we're streamlining the way that severely environmentally impacted sites that were previously subject to the Transfer Act, we're streamlining how those are now treated by DEEP and by DECD. Improving business environment, similar to above, this administration is really focused on trying to streamline and make it easier to do business in this state. And it's something that really suffuses when you're a state employee, you can feel it sort of from top to bottom. And there's been a lot of progress on that front. The Transfer Act being one of the key changes that DECD is happy about towards the effort to improve the business environment. And then lastly, we're making direct investments. The state is making investments in infrastructure, in arts and tourism, in the remote workforce, and helping to build out the workforce. And workforce development is a big a huge priority for the governor. So there's direct investment. It's not just making it easier for folks to do their own investment. We are also directly investing in high priority projects that we think are going to continue to fuel the economy and make people want to live in Connecticut and make people want to hire you all to build homes. So yep, that's it. I was right at, that was the last slide. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jim. Hopefully that gives you guys a good 10,000 foot view. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Dr. Dietz.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, for your presentation. For your benefit and the benefit of those those attending today, we do have single-family builders and multifamily builders within our association, as well as plenty of remodelers and those companies that support our industry. So thank you again for that very informative presentation. And also, I think I saw Commissioner Lehman join the meeting as well. And I wanted to just extend my thank you, to Commissioner Lehman, to the governor, and all those good people at DECD who had a hand in ensuring that our industry and our suppliers remained essential during the pandemic. If we didn't have that designation early on, I think our industry would be in a very different place right now. So please accept our heartfelt gratitude. Shifting gears, I'd like to welcome Dr. Dietz. For most here, Dr. Dietz does not need any introduction, but for those who may not know Dr. Dietz, he's the Chief Economist and Senior Vice President for Economics and Housing Policy and the crown jewel of the National Association of Home Builders. So I've seen Dr. Dietz speak on a number of different occasions, and I've always come away with a little smarter and a little more knowledgeable for it. So Dr. Dietz, welcome. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Jim. That was an excellent presentation from the Deputy Commissioner at the 10,000 foot level. I think I'm probably going to take you up to the 30,000 foot level and kind of put this all into the big picture. I think our information is going to complement each other quite well. And before I get started, I should probably pass along hello to everyone from Jim Tobin, our chief lobbyist at NAHB, of course, who has Connecticut roots, and it was good to see Chairman Ugaldi on the call as well in terms of NAHB leadership. Yeah, I think when we look back at 2020, we saw growth in a lot of housing markets. Housing was the bright spot for the overall economy, and the challenge for 2021 and 2022 is seeing which markets can protect and build on and sustain that momentum. And a lot of that momentum was caused by changes related to the virus itself, the downturn, historically low interest rates, and the ability of buyers and renters to seek out new markets in which they can reside in. And so I think if you're thinking about higher construction costs, ongoing regulatory burdens, these are factors that are going to determine whether some of the growth that we saw in 2020 in markets like Connecticut can be sustained. So in terms of the overall economy, we do think growth is going to accelerate in 2021. That's a good news, bad news situation for housing markets and real estate markets. The good news, of course, is a broader economic growth is going to help the labor market, but we're already seeing the bad news side of that, which is higher interest rates. So housing affordability really does risk erosion here in 2021, in part due to the really strong price gains that the Deputy Commissioner indicated and that we see nationwide. On average, nationally right now, home prices are about 10% higher than where they were at the start of 2020. We think, though, there's a lot of potential in terms of single-family building, remodeling construction, particularly on the single-family side. Since the end of the Great Recession more than a decade ago, we have certainly underbuilt single-family housing. So there's a deficit in much of the country. So there's that underlying potential. We need to build more to provide housing for those younger households. Multifamily is a little more complicated story. I will detail that when we get there in terms of those drivers in terms of the multifamily market. I think we'll see some stabilization, but there's certainly some weakness right now related to density and higher construction costs. Ongoing regulatory burdens, certainly lumber is a big challenge. And again, this kind of complements what the Deputy Commissioner was indicating, which is that we saw, due to telecommuting, and we think probably about 40% of workers had the ability to work from home most of the time. And we do think that some of those changes with respect to the workforce are going to be partially persistent. And by that, we mean that there's probably going to be about 40% of the workforce that's going to adopt something like a 3-2-2 model, work in the office 3 days a week, work at home 2 days a week, and of course, a 2-day weekend. That means that they're going to be commuting less. And so markets like Connecticut and markets in certain parts of the Midwest and the Southeast have an opportunity to maybe take some business away from traditional markets like New York and Boston and Washington and San Francisco. So we'll see how that plays out. In terms of the overall economy, we do expect accelerating growth as we go into 2021. Last year, the national economy shrank by about 3.5%. And our forecast is a little more conservative, but right now we're expecting the U.S. economy to grow by about 5%, and there are forecasts for it to grow stronger still, 7% growth rates. You can see those blue bars after that red vertical line. That's our forecast window, and you can see they're kind of taking steps up. So as the vaccine becomes more readily available, we think that growth in 2021 is going to pick up speed, and then eventually get to a more sustainable level in 2022 at around a 4% growth rate. I'm really glad the Deputy Commissioner included the third quarter data for the state, because I don't have the annual data yet for the state of Connecticut in terms of GDP growth. You can see the challenge here, though. Average growth rates in 16, 17, and 2019 of 0 to 1%. So a tick up in growth that's comparable to neighboring states is certainly good news. My expectation is that Connecticut is probably among the winners in terms of 2020, in terms of growth expectations, but it's unfortunately coming off of a flat base. And of course, a healthy, functioning housing market with expansion and home building really is a great way to sort of grow the economy and sustain what we think is growing demand for new kinds of communities, like 15-minute neighborhoods in this new commuting world that we're going to be in. And just to kind of take a step back to get a sense of how the economy has changed, and this is a reason behind some of the strength in the housing market that we saw in 2020. There was a big substitution shift within the GDP data, and this applies nationwide and statewide, between services and the goods economy. You can see the service economy went down in the spring as we entered into those lockdowns. It has rebounded due to partial restaurant reopenings and other kinds of service sectors, but it is lower than where it was at the start of 2020. And we think that is going to persist for much of 2021. In contrast, the goods economy took that dip down, but then rebounded and is stronger than where it was at the start of 2020. And that's really important, because that is illustrating why housing was that bright spot in 2020. Housing is the center of that goods economy, the economy that essentially we can look and feel and experience right in front of us, whether we're working at home, studying at home, exercising at home. So some of that's going to roll back, of course, with the deployment of the vaccine, but there is a partial persistence between the substitution effect that really is going to help detail how economies grow from this point forward. In terms of the labor market, the national unemployment rate right now is about 6.3%. It's better than where we thought it was going to be at the start of 2021. And I think the state data really kind of illustrates this here. This is the data for the state of Connecticut. You see the big drop when job losses in the spring during the initial lockdown, tightening restrictions period, a pretty strong recovery. And so when you hear economists talk about V-shaped or K-shaped recoveries, you're typically looking at charts like this, and that's a pretty strong V-shaped recovery that masks over some K-shaped challenges, so that some households are doing worse than others. The challenge here is, yes, Connecticut payroll employment 6% lower than where it was in December. That's pretty good. In fact, that's very close to the national average. Some neighboring states like New York are in a more negative position in that context. But you can see it kind of levels off here as we go into 2021. And that's the story we've got in terms of labor market recovery. It is going to be harder to obtain those recovery gains from this point forward. So those gains are going to come, but they're going to come slower, and they are going to be more policy dependent in terms of how local economies continue to grow in 2021 and 2022. And I mentioned the fact that interest rates are going up. And there are two drivers of interest rates. It's basically more growth, higher interest rates, and higher inflation expectations yield higher interest rates. And we've got a little bit of both right now. I think the more important driver is the improved growth expectations for 2021, particularly as the vaccine allows much of the economy to fully reopen. But you can see that the blue line here is the 10-year Treasury. Just the last 2 weeks, we've seen a pretty strong sustained move up in those rates, and that is going to lift mortgage interest rates. And not to put too fine of a point on it, if we think about the housing market in terms of the demand side and the supply side, we'll go through some of the supply side challenges quickly here in a few slides. But on the demand side, it's demographics that are working in our favor. The fact that we have a housing deficit, we haven't built enough housing. You'll see that clearly in some state data I've got in here. But also on the demand side, home price growth prices buyers out of the market, and higher interest rates price buyers out of the market. And you can see on the red line, that's our forecast for the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. It probably reached a historic low around 2.7% at the end of 2020, and it is now rising. It's at an average rate of 3% right now, according to Freddie Mac, and it is likely to continue to rise. Now, to be clear, it's going to remain below 4% for the next couple of years, which is historically low, but it is going to move higher. So supply side type cost factors are going to have a magnifying impact because of those higher interest rates that buyers face. And the fundamental driver of housing demand, buying and renting, of course, is population growth. Here, I'm not delivering any new news, but this is the challenge for the state as a whole. You can see the population growth rates for the country as a whole, which have been slowing down, lower birth rates, reduced immigration, but 2020 a 0.4% growth rate. The challenge for Connecticut, even in 2020, where the housing market was fairly strong, even on a relative basis compared to other states in Connecticut, a negative 0.3% net change in population. So yes, you see some of that inbound Postal Service data that the Deputy Commissioner presented, but on a net basis, the state is still losing population. And really, if you look at the states that are growing their populations, they have affordable housing markets and pro-business climates. It's a really simple recipe as we move forward. Supply side factors, what do we got? We surveyed builders and asked them what are the top challenges in terms of being able to build housing and add inventory to the market. We know the market is inventory starved. The number one issue, building materials, particularly lumber, but it's just taking longer for all materials to arrive at work sites, and the costs are going up. Number two, it's taking longer for local jurisdictions to approve projects that are being proposed, permit approvals and the like. That is a big issue nationwide, and it's certainly an area where we as the industry could get some help from government in terms of trying to get those approvals in a more timely manner. Number three is the long-term challenge, the ongoing middle skills labor shortage that we have for the industry as a whole. And then number four, no big surprise here, but new ordinances and other kinds of regulatory burdens that increase the cost of housing and essentially act as a tax on housing supply and limit inventory. So that's what builders are telling us as their challenges to be able to add inventory to a market that's really starved for it right now. And an update on the lumber market. This is really kind of occupying my day, every day, kind of watching this market and meeting with officials in the Biden administration talking about this. Lumber pricing right now is above $1,000 per thousand board feet. We've got the February 19th data here. It continues to move higher. It is adding, for a typical newly built home, about $24,000 to the price of that home, and more so in more expensive markets and markets with larger housing. That move up from mid-April is more than 180% right now, and just again a simple solution. We need to increase our domestic production of lumber, and that's something that NAHB is working on. But it is a limiting factor. We understand it is causing challenges across the country in terms of the building market. And I mentioned that number four challenge in terms of our builder survey. This is a study we do every 5 years. It was done in 2011. 2016. We've got a new study going into the field, but when we add up all those ordinances and all those different kinds of regulations that go into adding cost to the land development stage and adding cost to building a home, what's the aggregate effect? And nationwide is about 24%. And in more regulated markets, more coastal markets, starts to sound familiar, it's higher still. And so this really is, if we're looking for low-hanging fruit to try to help cool that unsustainable home price growth that we've seen 10% year over year by adding inventory, improving the regulatory environment, particularly at the land development stage, but also at the building code stage and the other parts of the production process, is the easiest way to bend the supply cost curve in a favorable direction and help add housing inventory. And so, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, we're really watching housing affordability conditions this year. This is something that Chairman Ugalde has been laser focused on during his tenure as a senior officer at NAHB. This is our national affordability metric. It's the NAHB Wells Fargo Housing Opportunity Index. It's basically the percent of new and existing home sales that are affordable for a typical household. And you can see since the end of the Great Recession, it's been on this kind of long-term downward trend. And in fact, in our most recent reading, only about 58% of new and existing home sales are affordable for a typical household. And my concern is that with rising lumber costs, rising regulatory burdens, increases in interest rates, and home price growth being driven, ironically enough, by the fact that we haven't built enough because of those factors, is going to continue to drive housing affordability down. And let's be clear about it. State by state, market by market, there's a lot of competition right now for households and businesses who are taking a second look on where to locate in the new world of commuting, in the new world of how much office real estate exposure do you want to have. The markets that are going to win are the markets that are most affordable, easiest to build in from the commercial side, and easiest to build in from the residential side. So we're going to be watching this. I really think housing affordability is the story for 2021 after the growth that we saw last year. And if we want to look at the past in terms of winners and losers, this is the geography of homeownership. Red is bad on this map. Blue is good. Got a little bit of a mix locally in Connecticut. The Connecticut homeownership rate, 67%. That's right in line with the national average. So again, kind of mixing out the little bit of good and a little bit of bad. And not to use them as a straw man too much, but you can look at California as an example of where it goes wrong from a policy perspective. Lots of red counties, declining home ownership. In fact, California last year lost population for the first time in 4 decades because it is simply so expensive to build housing. They're driving households to Utah and northern Colorado and Idaho and other parts of the mountain states, and businesses are moving from San Francisco to Austin, Texas because of that affordability equation. All right, so we'll take a look at the outlook and then the wrap up. We asked builders, what are the big changes coming out of 2020? Number one, more space, particularly with respect to home offices. So we think home size is going to increase as we move forward. 2 of the top 4 issues cited by builders in terms of big changes coming out of the pandemic are geographic. More homes built in the suburbs, and then number 4, more homes built in exurban and outlying rural areas. This is the trend that helped grow the Connecticut single-family home building market in 2020. And you see it nationwide, by the way. It's not an isolated example. It's not just New York City, but there really was a decentralization of home building supply across the marketplace. And number 3, exterior amenities. This gets back to what I was saying before. We're using our homes for more purposes. And that's actually a pretty bullish sign, by the way, for the remodeling market, which also experienced pretty strong growth last year. The nationwide forecast, before I show you the local and or the state data, 2020, we ended the year up 12%. Remember that number. It'll be important on the next slide. 2021, ongoing growth, but at lower growth rates. That's the story for 2021, a 5% growth rate, and the first year where we're going to get above 1 million single-family starts, the first time since the Great Recession. The industry is still essentially recovering from that downturn more than a decade ago. And you can eyeball the forecast, the dip down in the spring, a really strong rebound in the fall and the summer, and then basically we're returning to trend, but ongoing growth. And again, the housing deficit exists. We probably need to be building about 1.1 to 1.2 million single family homes per year. We're not there yet. So there's a runway of growth. And again, the markets that are in the best position to be able to build and develop land are going to win that race. All right, so I said, remember the 12% growth rate. The reason why is that Connecticut did better than the national average. A 12% gain for single family home building nationwide. Here's the statewide data, looking at about a 17% gain, according to the Census Bureau single family permit survey. But you can see the historical challenge there. And builders know this very well. Statewide, you can look at the level of production going back to 2004, 2005. That 17% gain sounds pretty strong, and it's moving in the right direction. We certainly view that as good news, but it still remains well below what we saw more than a decade ago. A lot of that connected to population growth. But again, there's this real kind of window of opportunity to change those population trends by essentially building housing and attracting businesses in this new commuting environment. I mentioned home size. Home size has been falling the last 4 or 5 years for builders. It's leveled off now. And in fact, I think it is going to go higher over the next 2 years, just due to the fact that we're using our homes for more purposes. Multifamily, I said at the beginning that we saw some weakness. Nationwide multifamily starts were down about 2% in 2020. Permits were down about 12%. So our forecast, which has been revised up just slightly, 2021, we expect about an 8% drop, but you can look at the blue line here. It's really more a story about stabilization after a really strong, unsustainable start to 2020 that was then interrupted by the virus itself. And there's also going to be a change in where apartments are built and the kinds of apartments. We expect more low-rise, more stick-built type multifamily, and it's going to be more decentralized, more multifamily built in the suburbs, frankly, in areas like Connecticut. So again, that window of opportunity for markets like yours. And you can see the data, multifamily data, particularly at the state level, tends to be fairly noisy. Kind of a localized peak there in 2015, a drop down in 2020. You see that throughout much of the Northeast, by the way, that multifamily experienced weakness sooner in this part of the country than the rest. So I would expect stabilization for the multifamily market locally. But again, a lot of it's going to depend on improving the regulatory burdens associated with constructing multifamily structures and the ability to build with density where the market demands it. And, we also talk about the remodeling market. I said remodeling was strong in 2020, and we think more or less those gains will continue, particularly as the resale market gets a little bit of a jolt for some additional inventory after the vaccines are deployed. But we saw about a 7% gain last year. I think it's going to be similar at a 6% rate this year. But as we use our homes more, whether it's additions or space changes, design changes, or just simply repair activity, the remodeling market is going to be particularly key. And it is more important, frankly, on a relative basis in states and markets that have an older housing stock that requires additional gains for energy efficiency and resiliency and things like that. So the remodeling market will be strong in Connecticut in the next years to come. And just to kind of wrap it up, I think it's important to put the housing market in context to the overall commercial real estate market. The blue line here is residential fixed investment. It's a dollar value of essentially all home building, single family, multifamily, and remodeling. You can see that blue line took the dip in 2020 and then rebounded and was stronger than it was at the start of the year. Very similar to the goods economy I showed you at the start of this talk. In contrast, the non-residential construction sector is likely to experience weakness, at least according to our forecast, for about 4 to 5 years. It's more like the service economy that I showed you at the start of this presentation. And that does present some redevelopment opportunities, particularly when we've got a long-run housing deficit. So one of the opportunities in that window of potential growth is trying to convert unused non-residential structures into residential buildings, whether it's slightly higher density single-family housing or urban villages with townhouses and low-rise multifamily. I think in particular, shopping malls are ripe for that kind of conversion, but we need policy help to make those kinds of changes because it requires zoning, it requires tax support, infrastructure spending, and all those areas are where state and local policymakers can help convert that kind of housing in this new world with more telecommuting and more opportunities for buyers and renters to shop around. And with that, I want to thank you very much. It was good to be able to join you today, and I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dietz, for your presentation. I think the gist of the story that I took from the presentation is that Connecticut has seen some really positive trends as of late in the residential construction industry. However, success in the future lies on a precarious perch, and that we certainly need to do everything we can to mitigate the issues pertaining to housing affordability moving forward and to ensure success in the future. But thank you very much for your time. I think we actually might have a minute or two for questions before we start the panel discussion. I think there may have been one or two already in the chat. If you'd like to field one of those, that would be great. I see a question from Alan Lazowski, who asks if you could elaborate on the reasons for the rising lumber costs.
Yeah, this has been a tough challenge. You've probably seen some of the stories in the press about this. There was a good one on CNBC, one recently on the Wall Street Journal saying, okay, lumber prices have effectively almost tripled. Does that mean that, for example, logging prices are way up? And the answer is no. The loggers say their prices and revenues and costs are kind of the same. The lumber yards are facing much higher prices for spot pricing. Of course, builders, remodelers, and therefore home buyers and renters have too. The blockage appears to be at the sawmill level. Part of the challenge is trade. We do have tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber. They were slightly reduced in 2020, but we need to get a new softwood lumber agreement with Canada to get more structural lumber in the United States. But the primary challenge is domestic sawmill capacity. And yes, we're seeing some shortages in steel and computer chips that are affecting the auto industry, but nothing as has the run up in pricing that we've seen in lumber. So we need to increase domestic production of lumber, and we really need the sawmills to step up to make sure that the housing can remain that bright spot and that job creator here in 2021.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Dietz. Bob Wiedemann also asks if there are any projections pertaining to the price of lumber moving forward in the next 6 months to a year.
We like to think we can forecast a lot of things, and we're pretty good on demographics. I think we're pretty good on housing. Building materials is one of the really tough ones. And frankly, if I were better at it, I'd probably go and become a commodities trader. The best information that we have available on this kind of information is if you go look at the CME lumber futures market. There you've got people betting real money. And what it suggests, we should see some declines in the spring, but I'll warn you, the market said that would have happened right now as well, and it didn't. So the market, I think, has continuously underpriced the demand. My expectation would be it will come off $1,000 as we get into the summer. I think it'll kind of settle in this $800 range, but it's likely headed higher for the next few weeks. And the reason why is those southern winter storms that cause so many burst pipes in markets that aren't as prepared for winter weather as, say, Connecticut is. And the result is tens of billions of dollars of structural damage. That's going to increase the demand for lumber, and then a fair number of southern sawmills have their production go down because of that weather. That's a bad combination and is likely to cause lumber prices to go up over the next few weeks.
Sure. Thank you again, Dr. Dietz, for your presentation. It was insightful and informative as always, and thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you, Jim.
Last on our agenda today is a panel discussion with policymakers whose decisions directly impact our business and our industries. Moderating the discussion is our very own Eric Santini, who's the president and chairman of the HBRA of Connecticut. And our guest panelists include Representative Kristen McCarthy-Vahey, serving the town of Fairfield and co-chair of the Planning and Development Committee. Also with us is Senator Steve Cassano, serving the towns of Andover, Bolton, Glastonbury, Manchester, and co-chair of the Planning and Development Committee. With us as well is Representative Joe Zullo, serving East Haven and ranking member of the Planning and Development Committee. and Senator Rick Lopes, serving the towns of Berlin, Farmington, New Britain, and the co-chair of the Housing Committee. Finally, we have Senator Paul Ciccarello with us, who serves the town of Durham, as well as East Haven, North Haven, and Wallingford, and is the ranking member of the Housing Committee. Before the panel discussion begins, I'd like to remind attendees that when the discussion concludes, Eric will take questions directly from the audience for the remaining 15 minutes of our time here today. And we ask that you type those questions into the chat box for Eric to read. And just as an FYI, there were some questions in the chat box pertaining to the slide deck for the Deputy Commissioner and the presentation by Dr. Dietz. I'm certain that we'll be able to provide those to you after the event is over. In addition, we are recording this event, and it will certainly be posted on our website and in other platforms. So, Eric Santini, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Jim. My name is Eric Santini. I'm a builder developer out of Vernon. And before we get started with the panel discussion, I'd like to thank Dr. Dietz and Deputy Commissioner Daum. Great presentations, a lot of very interesting information. I think especially Dr. Dietz, when he's talking about the potential for housing in Connecticut, I think that's something that we really have to keep in mind. Our industry has really been down for a long time, since the Great Recession, since 2008. And unexpectedly, or maybe somewhat expectedly looking back on it, from the outside of the pandemic, we've actually been a shining star in the Connecticut economy. And I think our industry can be a big part as we try to get out of this pandemic and get out of the economic and financial challenges that we're going to be, that some of our local businesses have had to endure. I think we can be a big part of the solution. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panel, and maybe what I'll do is introduce each one of you one at a time, and then if once I introduce you, maybe just give us a few minutes on your background, and any housing initiatives you'd like to see done during this session. So why don't I start with Representative McCarthy-Vahey, who is a co-chair of Planning and Development. Does you have to be unmuted, Jim?
Eric, thank you so much, and thanks, Jim, and to all of you for being here with us today. It's a pleasure to be here, and also to meet the good senator, who I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet and hope to in person at some point. I am, again, Kristen McCarthy-Vahey. I co-chair Planning and Development. As Jim said, I'm from here in Fairfield. This is my second term in the Planning and Development Committee, and it's been a pleasure to work with some of you. I see Chris on here as well. I think there are a lot of issues that we have to tackle, because obviously a session ended abruptly last year without a number of bills. In Planning and Development, we tackle issues related to municipal government, to property taxation, and also to zoning. And I think that's going to be probably a big part of the conversation. Not I think, it will be a big part of the conversation this year. We have one bill filed already that is the zoning reorganization. And that's something that we hope to continue the conversation on. It's a bill that's been passed previously by the committee. And then a number of other proposals that have been put forward, some from the Connecticut Realtors, Home Connecticut, which I know that this group has been a part of and a voice in, some from a group called Desegregate Connecticut, some from our municipal organizations. And we hope to put those on the table to be able to have a conversation. Senator Cassano and I need to work together to get some of that specific language together, because there's a lot to do with that. But also the other piece that I know Home Builders was advocating for was a permit extension. And we did just file bill language yesterday on that. So I know there's more to say, but I'll leave it for now, because I know the others will want to add as well. Thanks again for having me here.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to the other co-chair of Planning and Development, Senator Steve Cassano.
Thank you, Eric. Can you hear me, Eric?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I want to, first of all, I can assure you that as co-chairs, we work exceptionally well together on some of our priority issues, clearly of the builders. The presentation by Dr. Dietz, I'd like to see if you could forward that to all of our members of the committee, because I thought it was just a terrific piece of work. I want to go back in the past. I had the opportunity to serve as either mayor or deputy mayor for 28 years in Manchester. And I say that because when I came into office, we had large abandoned factory buildings. This was a real industrial center for a period of time under the Cheney brothers. Those empty buildings now were filled with people in 2 and 3 bedroom apartments throughout the town. It's changed dramatically. The housing opportunities here, living in Vernon, what it's like to see that kind of a positive impact, and more important, to see the elimination of those empty factory buildings that we see in a lot of our large cities. That has dogged us for a long period of time. In my 10 years in the Senate, we have been discussing some of those same buildings in Waterbury and Bridgeport and so on that need to be renovated and brought up to speed and turned into housing. And so the challenges are real, but they're exciting because with the forecast, as Dr. Dietz talks about, Connecticut is a place that can bring about growth. And so it's a great time to be in it and to do these kinds of things. And I think we're going to move forward and do well in Connecticut. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Senator Cassano. I'll go to the ranking member of Planning and Development, Representative Joe Zullo.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Madam Chair. It's good to be on this roundtable with you, along with Senator Cassano, Senator Ciccarella, Senator Lopes, and good morning, everyone who is in attendance. I am Representative Joe Zullo. I'm the ranking member on the Planning and Development Committee, and I represent the town of East Haven, almost all of East Haven. Prior to my service as a state representative, I served as corporation counsel for the town of East Haven for 8 years, from 2011 to 2019. And so I have a particular exposure, we'll say, to a lot of the housing and zoning issues that we're seeing before the Planning and Development Committee and that were discussed this morning. I see our role on P&D. We have a lot of roles, but this year in particular, I think we have an obligation to do what we can to facilitate addressing Connecticut's housing shortage, particularly the ELI housing shortage. But in doing so, I think we have a responsibility to balance the need for local control with the need to incentivize and encourage that development. For me this year, a particular item of interest is home ownership. I've always felt that home ownership is a key to empowering people, helping build generational wealth. And so my initiatives this year, including an initiative that allows towns to give a property tax credit for first-time home buyers if they use CHAFA to purchase a home, I see as a critical measure towards helping spur first-time home ownership and hopefully spur development. So I'm eager to listen to what everybody has to say this morning and to be fielding questions. So thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Senator Lopes. I thought I saw him join. Is he on the call?
Eric, Senator Lopes is here. I think he may need to be made a co-host so that he can unmute and turn on his camera.
Oh, okay. Jim, can you do that?
Yeah, I think Jill will be doing that right now.
Oh, okay.
Yes, he's a co-host now. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen, for saving me. I've been trying to get my camera on for a while. Thanks for inviting me onto this forum. As I've not had a lot of interactions with the group, which is ironic. I was a state representative for 9 years out of New Britain and Newington, and as of this year, I'm now the state senator representing all of New Britain, all of Berlin, and a little bit of Farmington. In my personal life, I'm a contractor and property manager for the last 18 years. And that's why the irony, when Jim Paris and I started talking, he was shocked by that. But I've never been on a committee that had a lot of interactions with home builders. So, but it is my background. It is my personal profession. So it's really looking forward to this year. I'm now on the housing committee, which has a little bit more overlap with your group. And I'd be, like I said, 18 years in the industry. I'd be happy to hear from any of you, and definitely understand a lot of the problems that face the industry and a lot of the advantages we have, and the kind of year that we're in, which is tough with the pandemic, but business-wise has been pretty busy for all of us, as you all know. But thank you very much for inviting me in, and look forward to talking to you.
Okay, thank you, Senator Lopes. And last but not least, Senator Cicerella, who is the ranking member of the Housing Committee.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invite to the forum and be a part of this panel. And thank you for letting me be a part to my colleagues, which of most I have had the ability to work with in my committees, which is Veterans Affairs, Housing, which is important to this panel, Appropriations, as well as Public Safety. A little bit about myself. My background here in district is small business, and part of that small business is remodeling and flipping houses. And it's so important, even when I was campaigning, to make sure that we are supporting builders, the remodelers. They're the backbone of our economy. They not only allow the opportunity for homes, which is so important, but stimulate the economy. When there's developments and we're putting in roads and building houses, so many people are getting jobs. So in my role with the Housing Committee, I really want to support home builders because they are the backbone of the economy. And I do look forward to addressing and answering any questions throughout this process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Just as a reminder, what Jim had mentioned before, if you have any questions, please feel free to, for the panel, please feel free to utilize chat, and I will try to get to every question that I can. I would like to start off with something that I think Representative McCarthy-Vahey had mentioned in her introduction about zoning reform. Zoning reform is one of our key initiatives at HBRA this year, or this session. And really, there's two arguments to this for zoning reform. One argument is municipal control of zoning regulations and as part of their plans of conservation development. On the other side is, are we really meeting the housing demands with our existing zoning regs that we're relying on for these 169 towns? As far as affordable housing, workforce housing, the middle missing housing. A lot of our zoning regs in our municipalities are dated. Some may even be exclusionary. So that really is the other side. And I guess what I'd like to put out to the panel is there room to compromise on this? Is there a way where the municipalities can have that control, yet really meet some of the housing demand that's not being met? And that really, goes, not only, to affordable, but really just an overall diversity of housing, having the zoning regs that allow for that. So I'll open it up to the panel. I don't know if I'll open up to any one of you if you want to start.
I guess I'll hop in.
Sure.
I think there's always room to be able to have that give and take for the better of the communities. But I think it needs to be done responsibly. I think that the municipalities know their districts and areas better than the state would. Have to be a balance, not only for, can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I coming in now?
Yep.
I do apologize. I have a poor connection. So if you're not hearing me, somebody just wave at me and I'll stop talking over here. But I think it is important that we look at these regulations and make sure it allows for building to move forward and allowing the housing that's needed for the area without taking away control from the municipalities, which know their areas best.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on this? Okay. So
it's always my inclination to defer to my party chairperson or my committee chairperson and good senator. So, Madam Chairwoman, if you'd like to weigh in first, I'd be happy to defer, or I can jump in.
Go ahead, Rep. Solo.
I can always make a great argument. Thank you. I can always make a great argument for local control of zoning. And actually, I read a fascinating article the other day making a strong argument for something that people often give a bad name, hyperlocal zoning. There was a case study on a particular case where hyperlocal zoning was, deployed, you'll say, or enabled as a test in certain areas. And it turned out fantastically well. We're literally down to the street level. Neighbors got together and were able to have control over the types of development literally on their streets with respect to lots that had gone vacant for years. There was no resolution that was able to be developed as to how they would be developed. And when they engaged all of the neighbors on that hyper-local basis, they were able to come to a resolution and spur development. So, I worry when people say, we need zoning reform because we can't trust municipalities to make these decisions. I think quite oppositely. Not only can we trust them, we can trust neighborhoods right down to the street level to make these decisions. Again, I see that we have a housing shortage in Connecticut. I see we have issues we need to address. And I just think we need to be as collaborative as possible as we start to craft the solutions to how to do that. And I think we need to be open-minded because, again, I can make a great case for hyperlocal zoning.
Okay. Representative McCarthy.
I saw Senator Cassano was leaning in. I'm going to defer to him.
Oh, okay.
Sure. And I understand that whole process of the hyper, but it also can be used in a very negative way in that it can be designed to keep people out. And, we have parts of Connecticut that do that. I mean, we know that. I live in an area, Manchester, Glastonbury, and so on. Glastonbury, good example, probably one of the wealthier towns in the district, but has been really progressive in opening Glastonbury up, taking students in from Hartford to the school system, building multiple housing. There are a lot of ways it can be done. It depends on the goals of the community. And obviously with 169 cities and towns, we have 169 different policies, and that's not necessarily workable sometimes, as we know. But we need to deal with the whole situation of A, providing housing, and B, providing it across the state where people have an opportunity to live. You can live in wealthy towns and not allow for, multi-family housing or lower cost housing and so on, but you're also losing a workforce in that community and so on. So those are factors that have to be part of that big picture. Thank you.
So I definitely would like to weigh in, Eric. I think that the issue of balance is always the question. And your question specifically was, is there room for compromise? That's what we do in the legislature. That's how we make laws. And, sometimes there's more compromise than others. Oftentimes, maybe things will lean more towards one side than the other. But in this case, I think that we need to be explicitly clear with the people of Connecticut and help them understand that there really is a housing crisis. I got a call from a neighbor the other day who has an underlying condition and is waiting for a vaccine. And he's unable to work right now because of that underlying condition and the inability to take some of the risks that I and others are able to take. And he talked to me about the fact that he hasn't been able to pay his mortgage. And he's really worried about losing his house. And we know what the numbers are in terms of the eviction tsunami that is headed our way. And in a community like mine right now, the demand incoming from New York is tremendous. Here in my neighborhood, houses are getting 10, 11, 12 offers. The rental market is so tight right now, people are unable to find affordable rentals here in the community. And so this is a real crisis, and we've identified that. And I think we need to acknowledge that. I think that there's always room for compromise. Connecticut is 169 communities. Unlike almost every other state in the nation, we don't have county government. We have COGs, and each COG does things a little bit differently. So while I absolutely agree we have to empower municipalities, which is why actually some of the tools that we've looked at, including land banks and receivership, for example, have been things that help our municipalities. I also think that things like training our zoning commissioners to help them know, how to enforce and make the laws, but also to help them focus on the planning side. Because, one thing that we can do, law or no law, state law or local zoning ordinances, there's also the market. And so the more a community can actually plan, work together in concert with developers and try and be proactive rather than reactive, I think the better it is. So yes, I think there will be lots of compromise. I think there has been a lot of conversation that's happened pre-session with a lot of different groups to talk about compromising. Specifically, the zoning enabling statute that we seek to reorganize. That bill was a result of a number of years of compromises with a number of people at the table. So yes, we have to take steps, but I think we'll be in conversation throughout and definitely hearing from our municipalities, hearing what they need and also hearing what we as a state need. So making sure that we balance that local need with our regional and statewide needs as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I would just add to that. I think, the danger of, not the danger, but the issue with 169 towns with their own zoning regulations is that they're not keeping up with the market demand. I mean, take affordable housing aside, a diversity of housing is really, probably what is needed most in the state, and we're not really meeting that demand. And if we're relying on 169 towns to kind of, update their zoning regs to really kind of account for that, that they could be, way behind the market. And I think that's what you're seeing in Connecticut right now, which is also leading to the affordability issue and the workforce housing issue. I mean, there's, I think Senator Cassano mentioned, there's a lot of benefits to having people that are, working in your town, living in your town, beyond just the obvious economic benefits, but the social benefits of that. They become more invested in their town. So I think that's an important issue. Any other comments on this? Okay. Do we have any questions from our audience for our panel? Nope. All right. Jim, did we have anything else that we wanted to discuss?
Sure. I think I could add a little bit to the discussion if folks don't mind. I think Dr. Dietz really did a fantastic job of pointing out the growing issue of affordability that is facing Connecticut at all levels with regard to construction, and specifically, multifamily and single family. What can the legislature do with regard to codes, with regard to regulations, to ensure that builders are able to build affordably moving forward into the future to meet the demands that are out there?
Anybody want to talk about it? Okay.
I'll jump in for a moment, and I see two of our senators are back with us, and I know Senator Lopes is back and forth. I don't know if either, before we go to that, not to be moderating your panel, but if either of the two senators wanted to go back to the other question, since they.
Yeah, Senator Lopes, did you want to comment on zoning reform?
Yeah, sorry. It's very difficult. I'm popping back and forth and waiting in line to speak in an appropriations hearing. I hope I don't repeat, because I wasn't listening for a while, anything that people said before. But the zoning reform, obviously, to build up capacity in certain communities. The one I'd like to talk about the most, if it hasn't been mentioned, is changing zoning around rail stations throughout the center of the state. I think that's a tremendous opportunity to allow for slightly denser housing in some of the communities along our rail lines, which tend to be underdeveloped. And it's a great opportunity because obviously commuter rail goes through there. It's highly used in the state. And if we could do denser housing and transit-oriented development around those rail stations, I think it would be a big boon to development in Connecticut.
All right. We'll go back to Jim's question.
Eric, before you do go back to my question, I think Paul, Senator Ciccarella had a little issue getting connected with us, and he's back with us. And I'm not sure if he heard your last question, and you may want to pose it to him before we move on.
Sure, we could do that. So Senator, we were talking about zoning reform, and of course the two sides of zoning reform. One, ultimate municipal control, and two, the other side is meeting the demand, the housing demand for a diversity of housing, including affordable, the missing middle housing and workforce housing. And is there anywhere to compromise in the middle on those two, from those two sides?
Thank you. So am I coming in a little bit better? I had to switch to
yes,
a
absolutely.
different connection. Okay. I do apologize for that. I kind of rambled on and gave my explanation of that before, but I do believe there is room to compromise, but we cannot take the control of the municipalities away, as they know their areas better, whether it's what their sewage control could handle, drainage, public safety. All of those things play a big role, and no one would know that better than the towns, the people who live in the towns, as well as the people who control the towns. But I always think that there is room for compromise. That's very, very important. There is a need for housing, as we said. Real estate is booming. Houses aren't staying on the market, so clearly there's a need. And as I said earlier, and I don't know if you heard me, that when houses are going up, it's great for everybody. It's great for the economy. It's great for the builders. It's great for work. And there needs to be the balance between both affordable housing and keeping the control with the municipality. So thank you.
Is there anything going on in the legislature to think about educating some of these planning and zoning and town planners in updating some of their town municipal zoning regs to allow for diversity of housing in their town to really meet that housing demand?
So Eric, we do have legislation that we will be looking at to require training for the commissioners. And this is really, for a number of reasons. One is to just make sure zoning law is kind of wonky. So to make sure that they have the tools that they need as commissioners, as volunteer commissioners, in part to help avoid litigation as well, but also to empower them. Again, I think it's about giving municipalities tools, and I think that's one of them. Certainly there's been pushback on having that as a requirement, but a lot of our groups have worked together, CCM costs and some others, as to how to more easily make that kind of training accessible. And here we are. We're seeing some of the ways that we hopefully will be able to do that. And I'll also just add that I was a Girl Scout leader and a Boy Scout leader for a long time, and I had to go to required training in order to do that. So I think that it's, for the commissions that are really driving the economic future of our state, it's sometimes hard to get those folks because they're not all elected in communities. So we also have some legislation to address that to help ease the burden a little bit there. But I think it's something that we need to be looking at.
Okay.
I'd like to add to that, Eric.
Sure, Senator.
This is a unique opportunity. We're looking for 2 hours of training once a year, but training is a lot of ways it can be defined. And a simple example is getting like yourself, getting some of the builders to be part of that training process, the interaction. There is no interaction between the planning and the zoning commissions, as an example, as a unit, and the builders as a unit. I don't know if that discussion has ever taken place, but it should. Those kinds of things can really lead to a move forward, an understanding between the two, and economic development. It seems that we almost, by definition, the way we do things, pit one against another, and so we have to work around the system that we have, where we can bring people in the system together. We're going to get a lot more done. So. To me, training is not just going to listen to somebody about rules or regulations of P&D, but what can we do to expand it? What can we do to make it better? The whole process locally. What do the local P&Z people need from the builders, vice versa? We've never done that, and it could be very, very productive.
I think it's a good point. I mean, I think there's a lot of, and I can speak to multifamily development as a multifamily developer. There's a lot of misnomers about allowing for multifamily development in your town. Oh, we're going to tax the school systems. Oh, it's going to be dragging our infrastructure. And really, none of this is actually based on any facts. It's sort of just based on, well, it's the character of our town. And I think that's important to educate some of these planners and some of these PZC commissions. I've got a question in. I'm just going to read it about stretch code zoning. I know that's something that the governor has brought up, and I'm just going to read it word for word. What are your thoughts on stretch codes and municipalities having the ability to put more stringent energy codes in the state building code? In essence, having 2 building codes, which could be beyond problematic for a builder. Anyone want to take this one on?
I think you identified it well.
Eric.
Very problematic.
Yeah. I don't even know how you would, but yeah, go ahead, Senator.
Yeah, I could jump. I'm not actually familiar with the governor's proposal and what he exactly wants there, but yeah, obviously, there's no one works in just one town. It's hard enough keeping track of different, let's say, peculiarities between housing inspectors in different towns. I mean, everyone jokes about every town's a little bit different already. So if they had different rules, I just couldn't even imagine the nightmare scenario we'd be facing. But yeah, that's all I could say to that. I'd have to see what the governor's proposal is.
Okay. Representative Zullo, or no? Sorry,
yeah, Senator. I apologize. I personally believe we need less rules, not more, especially when it comes to building. And we're talking about making it more affordable for builders. We need to cut through some of that red tape. You buy a piece of land, if that has, I don't know, maybe a dam on it, it could take 6 months to figure out what to do and how to redirect that water. And that's going to be quite expensive for the builders and the investors. And it's going to just hold up this development that we are looking for. So I think less is more in these type of situations. We need to, take the handcuffs off and let the builder build to stimulate our economy.
Representative Zullo, I'm sorry, Senator.
I was going to say, oh, sorry, Rep, if I can jump in. I just want to cap off. There are some initiatives that maybe can be pushed town by town, but it's really got to be thought through. And I think they mostly revolve around energy efficiency. I know we have a pilot bill in housing this year that would be to encourage higher efficiency. I'm a big believer in heat pump technology combined with solar. And I think in really targeted pilot situations when someone's building something new, that you can make an emphasis or create some kind of incentive to say, hey, let's not go with an oil furnace anymore. Let's try to do a heat pump with solar combined, or geothermal, or something that really increases the efficiency of that house. But sorry, that's all I wanted to add on to that.
Okay. Representative Zullo, I think you can.
I was going to credit Senator Ciccarello because I was going to that exact topic next. I remember the Superstorm Sandy, Hurricane Irene down on the shoreline, and our shoreline was devastated. And in response, and all of a sudden, I saw building permits that were taking 2 or 3 weeks suddenly being issued overnight or the next day or 2 days after, because there was this collective understanding that we needed to move quickly, we needed to rebuild. And what I've never understood is why that mentality has never persisted. We represent lots of builders, lots of developers in our law firm, and I don't understand why it takes 2 or 3 weeks to get a CO, a week to 10 days to get a building permit. They're common frustrations. And so I agree with Senator Ciccarello that I don't know if it's necessarily on a legislative level or something we could do in concert with our local officials just in our unofficial capacities as reps to encourage more streamlined processes. I do want to make a comment as to affordable housing, ADUs, middle housing. One of the concerns that I continue to have is that housing actually does get leverage to address the housing shortage. What I don't want to see in those contexts are people developing ADUs, us developing middle housing, going through all this effort, and then having them used for Airbnbs, vacation houses, things like that. We have a housing shortage. Whatever we do, whatever we enact to address it, should be actually functioning to address it, not to, again, create Airbnbs, vacation homes, things like that.
Well, and I will say, Representative Zullo, somebody that actually builds in a family business that we build multifamily rentals. I can tell you, and we build low-rise stick built, like Dr. Dietz was talking about, in the suburbs. I mean, the demand is absolutely there. I mean, we have waiting lists, and we've had waiting lists for a while. So certainly, I think that demand is very real. So
if I may jump into this, I think that all of us as humans, we try to be as consistent as we can, right, in what we do and in our lives. And I think that there's a desire to have consistency in the legislature. But what we find in these conversations is that there are some things that we want to allow towns to do on their own, and other things we think should be done at the statewide level. And that makes sense because, you know what, as a country, we are a group of states, and there are certain things that we do federally and some things we do as states. And as a state, we're a group of municipalities, and there are some things we do as a state and some things we do as individual municipalities. And that's part of our job as legislators, is to decide where that balance lies. I'm hearing pretty clearly from folks that doing this with the codes doesn't make sense, because we need to have a uniform approach so that builders and developers can understand what the rules are in one place and not the other. I would argue you might want to say the same for zoning for a lot of folks. But again, I think that there's somewhere in the middle. When it comes to codes specifically, not necessarily about the where should it be decided issue, but I do think that we've got to do a whole lot more to be thinking about energy efficiency. And I appreciate Rep. Zullo bringing up Sandy. We had a 100-year flood with an inland waterway here in Fairfield a couple years back, and hundreds and hundreds of homes were underwater. And so there's no doubt that what we're seeing, greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, are real. And when you think about the fact that 38% of our state's greenhouse gas emissions are coming from the transportation sector, what that makes me think is we have to solve that in part by electrifying our fleets, which is what Amazon and UPS are doing. GM is going to go that way. Why do I bring this up? Because people live far from where they work. And now, obviously, working patterns have changed. So some of these conversations admittedly have shifted. But when we think about the ability for people to live where they work and for us to be able to lower those emissions, I think it's all connected. You can see that, I look at the ways that these things are connected to one another. So I do think it makes sense with what my colleagues are saying in terms of, from a code standpoint, having that universal view makes sense to me. But I also think we've got to do more to incentivize and improve energy efficiency, not just in the building sector, but across all sectors.
Well, and I would just say, to the stretch code argument, the IRC and the IBC in our state adoption process of our state code really kind of deal with energy efficiency already. And we've been kind of incrementally going in that direction. The concern, I think, of our group, our association, is to have towns really kind of have the freedom to make up their own building code. That can be used for many things, and maybe not necessarily energy efficiency. So that can restrict building. So I think we're sort of already dealing with that. And I would also add, as a builder, I think about everything is really demand driven. So when I see that GM and Jaguar and BMW and all these Volkswagen, all these companies are going to go all electric, guess what? I'm going to get that house ready for an electric charging station. You don't have to tell me to do it. I'm going to do it. Right. So I think a lot of this is demand driven. And once we kind of see that pathway that someone's actually going to value it, we'll put that in our homes.
Well, Eric, can I just follow up on what you said, and forgive me, gentlemen. Sure. I just want to say I completely agree with you. I just, I don't want my comments to be mistaken for the idea that somehow, I think it does make sense. I think what you're suggesting is that two pieces, you're looking at a statewide or a broader industry practice to examine what these standards should be. And the second then is market demand. And when you think about that from a building and code standpoint or from a zoning standpoint, it goes back to your original statement, which is how are we doing to meet the demand? And part of what happens in communities, I've been a local leader since 2005. I was on our RTM and a selectman, not as long as Senator Cassano, but I have a few years of experience. And I think what happens is, I moved into this neighborhood and I had an expectation of how my neighborhood would be and look and the kind of heights and setbacks and densities and all that, right? And then when things begin to change, people can resist that. Sometimes the change is really welcome. Sometimes it is not. And we who are here in the neighborhoods may not necessarily be wanting to respond to the demand of the people who want to be living in our neighborhoods. So I think there's a balance there. I'm also just going to say it's orchestra time. So if you hear the violin in the background, don't mind. Rep. Zullo and Senator Cassano are used to this.
Representative Zullo, did you have something to add to that?
Well, I was also just going to add on the issue of energy. I also think it's really important, and you touched on it a little bit as far as seeing the trends and then essentially retrofitting, future construction based on what you're seeing. I think part of it's also public education. In East Haven, we did a historically adaptive restoration of our former high school. And what a lot of people don't know is that adaptation and renovation was done to passive house standards. And it was incredible because I actually hadn't known much about passive house until that project came to town, and I learned more than I ever thought I could know. And I mean, it's not quite to the point where you could put the project on the moon and it would essentially run itself, but it's tremendous the types of efficiencies that they're having there. And I think when people start to understand the benefits of those efficiencies, not only individually for their own pocketbooks, but for the greater, the greater community, I think you'll see even more of a demand for energy efficient upgrades and standards as we move forward.
Well, I think you made a great point too, Representative Zullo. I think one area that maybe the legislature should look at or has looked at is we have a very, the fact is we have a very old housing stock. We probably have one of the oldest housing stocks in the entire country. Are there incentives out there, other than the ones we know about Eversource, but is there any talk about further incentivizing remodeling for energy efficiency of that old housing stock that we have?
That's a sticky wicket there too. We've have a couple bills in the housing committee. Senator Ciccarella can attest to this on mandating, like temperatures in housing and a couple other things that I think are really impaired by our housing stock. I think I speak, I'm based out of New Britain and I do a lot of my work in New Britain. A lot of the concerns, especially when you're in a community where the housing stock isn't very expensive, you're looking at energy retrofits that cost more than the house does. And so I look at it like a 3-family apartment building in New Britain, which is very commonplace, a brick with balloon construction. We used to joke about the insulation being R1. It's basically hay. And there's no way to increase the insulation factor in these houses very easily without actually compromising safety in some situations with knob and tube wiring in the walls that you don't know about. And you don't want to just blow insulation in there and hope for the best. You could, start fires and other sorts of problems. So yeah, I'm a big advocate for energy improvements for newer construction and larger renovations. Renovation hits a certain level that, you guys got to incorporate some energy efficiencies. But on our, you're right, we have a serious problem with older housing stock. There's nothing wrong with it. It's going to be here for another 100 years long after we're gone. But until their values increase in some communities like New Britain, it's really hard to mandate any sort of energy efficiency. I mean, incentivize it all you want. People can take advantage of it, but it's tough, as you guys know, when you're dealing with old buildings.
Anybody else have a comment on that?
Well, I will, as a non-builder, but someone who lives in a 100-year-old house and had the privilege of being able to update and to put in some of those energy efficient options, I can tell you that, what Rick is saying is absolutely true. So that's where what we do as policymakers in terms of providing incentive and the balance on market demand, it requires investment, right? And are we willing to invest as policymakers in some of these solutions so that this can happen? Because when you think about some of those older houses, and particularly like you're talking about Senator Lopes, I got that right, is that, who are the families who are living in some of those homes, and the fact that they may not have the option to do that financially. So, one thing we haven't really talked about today is the fact that I think all of us after 2020, with both COVID and what we experienced last summer with George Floyd, and all of us talking a lot more about equity and race and class and what that means for us in terms of health outcomes and wealth building and mobility and all those things, that plays into the conversation as well.
Absolutely.
Eric, I just want to be respectful of everybody's time. We've hit that time in the day where we've come to the conclusion of our event. Certainly, if you want to allow for folks to have any final thoughts, I'm sure we can do that and then conclude.
Absolutely. We'll open it up to the panel. I'll start with Representative Zullo. Do you have any final thoughts?
I'm just going to add that my first house was a reno job and it had zero insulation. I found out the hard way. I went to go address a small water bubble somewhere and I looked in the wall and I said, oh, there's no insulation. And then drew the conclusion that there was obviously no insulation in any of the walls. So I recognize where that's coming from. But in all seriousness, thank you to everybody for facilitating the conversation. Obviously, there's obvious agreement that we need to make some changes. There's obvious agreement that we have things we need to address. The question is just how do we craft those solutions? I really love P&D because it was said the first meeting we had, it's the best committee you can be on. I really do believe that. There's far more consensus than there is disagreement. And I think that we're going to be able to enact some really great policies that this year, they're going to go a long way towards addressing some of the challenges we've heard today. So thank you again for facilitating. And I'm available to anybody else afterwards or, in follow-up to this. My email is very easy to track down. I'm sure it'll be circulated somehow. So thank you again.
Thank you, Representative Zullo. Senator Cigarello, did you have anything you wanted to?
No, just again to thank everybody. And this is my first year, so I do understand normally this is done at the Capitol. So hopefully the next time this comes around, we're in person at the Capitol, and I look forward to that. And Eric mentioned that the builders stepped up in this COVID and were the shining stars. I truly believe that the builders and remodelers are always the shining stars, behind the driving force of our economy. If you're building houses, that means somebody needs to live in them. And as you're building those houses, you're creating the jobs. And that's what we need here in Connecticut more than ever. And we have to make it affordable. We talk about affordable housing. If it was cheaper for the home builders, it would be cheaper for everybody else to buy those houses. So I think we really need to concentrate on making it easier and less expensive for the trades to go to work and do what they do best. And at the end of the day, when houses go up, there's landscapers, there's attorneys doing closings, mortgage companies. It touches every part of our economy, and we need to stimulate that. And I look forward to assisting in any way I can. And I'm reachable by email or phone at any time. And thank you again.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, there's definitely a huge ripple effect for what we do. Senator Casado, do you have any parting thoughts? Oh, I think you got to unmute Senator Casado. There we go.
This was very productive. A couple of things. I'm glad I was able to hear the presentation by Dr. Dietz. I'd like us to get a copy of that. I think the Housing Committee members and the P&D committees would benefit by having that. I'd also like to pursue possibility of putting something together, maybe through the COGS, but somewhere where we can get the builders and the trades together with those that make those planning and zoning decisions and so on. I don't think they've ever done that, and it's time we do that. We have that kind of a conversation so that each can understand where each is coming from and maybe reach compromise. I think it can only be productive. So I will pursue that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Lopes, did you have a parting thought?
No, just apologize again for bouncing back and forth. It's made it a little difficult for me. I do want to increase the dialogue. I saw one of the chat questions about how can you guys best interact with us. And I always say, as I teach a couple courses on legislative action for people, is build a relationship with people one-on-one. It's tough during this mixed of time when we get hundreds of emails a day or more to get one from a random person you never heard of. But once you build a relationship with a legislator, And I kind of remember who you are, even if you say, hey, I was on that forum with you the other day at the Home Builders. Then you send in an email and say, I read this in the news, or I saw this piece of legislation. I got concerns. I got questions. It'll definitely perk up my mind. It'll definitely, for me, get a response. You'll definitely get a response from me. And I'm interested in what you have to say, because once again, you're the subject matter experts in your field. We want to hear from you. And, stuff like this really helps us improve the quality of legislation that we do. So thanks a lot, and thanks for bearing with me as I bounce back and forth. I'm next now speaking, so I got to run. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Lopez. That's great. That's great advice. Representative McCarthy-Vahey, did you have any parting thoughts?
Well, just very much a thank you, Eric, for the conversation, and Jim. And just to let you know, I concur. I am available. Jim knows how to find me. But I also, just to let you guys know, we're going to continue to work to try and get the language in for the bills going forward. And we're doing the best we can in the remote environment, but we'll keep in touch with Jim and others about that. But thank you for this conversation today. These are probably some of the more weighty issues that we're going to be talking about this session. So I really appreciated the opportunity to be with you today.
Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the entire panel. That was a great conversation, and we look forward to keeping track of these issues through this session. We wish you the best of luck. I know it's a tough job, but thank you for taking your time. I'd also like to thank Jill from NAHB for helping us facilitate this. It's a challenge. We usually do this at the Capitol, so it's definitely a challenge doing this virtually. But I thought it went well, and and that's definitely she did a great job. And I also like to thank Joanne and Jim for putting this together. Joanne did a lot of work behind the scenes to make this happen today. Joanne Horner did a great job, and thank you, Jim, for bringing this forward.
Sure. And final thoughts and comments. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. I did hear loud and clear that folks are very interested in seeing the slides from Dr. Dietz and from Commissioner Daum, so we'll certainly get those out to everybody. And once again, this has been recorded, and we will be posting it once it's been edited and approved. So once again, thank you to all our presenters, our panelists, and of course our sponsors, and thank you to you, the attendees. To our members, we'll be sending out a sign-up sheet in the coming days to organize and facilitate one-on-one and or group virtual meet and greets with your legislators. So please be sure to sign up and take advantage of that. As you know, that the most effective form of advocacy is direct connection from you, the business owner, and you, the constituent, to your respective legislators. And we're going to be excited to help facilitate that for you. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Jill, for making sure the train stayed on the tracks. And of course, Joanne, who helped organize this entire event too. So thanks, everybody, and have a great day and a great weekend. Take care.